For thousands of years, the Xilari Dominion ruled the galaxy. Their empire stretched across countless star systems. Their war fleets crushed any who resisted, and their name alone was enough to instill terror. Fear was their greatest weapon, and no species had ever dared to challenge them. The weak were enslaved. The strong were exterminated. The Xilari were not just conquerors. They were masters of psychological warfare. They made examples of rebellious worlds, broadcasting their destruction across the stars. Entire civilizations vanished overnight. To the Xilari, dominance was their birthright, and submission was the only law. But then, they discovered a new species, a primitive one, still confined to a single planet: humans. At first, the Xilari paid little attention. Humanity was insignificant, barely capable of space travel. Other species had taken centuries to develop interstellar technology, but humans were different. They advanced too quickly, adapting too fast. What should have taken 1,000 years, they achieved in 100. This was unsettling. A species like this could become a threat. The decision to strike. The Xilari High Council gathered in their great chamber, floating above the capital world of Xeltor. Massive holographic displays showed intelligence reports on humanity's rapid progress. Fleet Commander Varek Tevos, a ruthless strategist, studied the data with narrowed eyes. "They are dangerous," he said coldly. "We must act before they become a problem." Some of the council disagreed. Humanity was still weak, still young. Why waste resources on a species that had not even left its home system? Varek slammed his fist on the table. "I have seen this before. We waited too long with the Drellic Rebellion, and they caused us decades of war. If we had destroyed them earlier, our control would never have been questioned." The council debated, but in the end, fear won. The Xilari always ruled with fear. That was their way. And so, the decision was made. Earth would be destroyed before humanity could ever rise. The fleet sets out. Varek Tethos was given command of the Third Imperial Fleet, a force strong enough to crush 10 planets. Hundreds of warships, each carrying thousands of troops, set course for Earth. The mission was simple: erase humanity from existence. As they traveled through hyperspace, Varek studied everything about humans. He read reports on their wars, their unpredictable nature, their strange ability to fight against impossible odds. It was curious, but in the end, it wouldn't matter. No species had ever survived a Xilari invasion. Humanity would be no different. The first contact. Earth's defense satellites picked up the incoming fleet before they even arrived. Panic spread across human governments. The United Earth Alliance scrambled its warships, but they were nothing compared to what was coming. The Xilari did not send messages. They did not demand surrender. They simply arrived. Varek's flagship, the Eternal Dominion, emerged from hyperspace above Mars, followed by the rest of his fleet. The skies darkened as hundreds of Xilari warships spread across the solar system. For a moment, there was silence. Then, Varek gave the order. Burn the planet. Massive plasma cannons charged up, targeting Earth's largest cities: New York, London, Beijing, Moscow, each marked for destruction. Human leaders sent desperate messages. "Wait, we are not your enemy." But the Xilari did not listen. They had heard these pleas before, from hundreds of species. And so the first plasma strike fell. It should have been over in minutes, but it wasn't. The unexpected resistance. Before the Xilari could fire their second wave, something unexpected happened. Humanity fought back. Missiles launched from Earth and its orbital stations, striking the lead Xilari ships. The Spear of Mars, a newly built human battlecruiser, charged straight into the enemy lines, ramming into its Xilari destroyer and detonating its reactor. Varek watched in stunned silence as human pilots sacrificed themselves to take down ships far more advanced than their own. They didn't run. They didn't beg. They fought. Varric felt something he hadn't felt in centuries. Doubt. The first mistake. The battle over Earth lasted far longer than expected. Humanity should have fallen in hours, but they held out for days. Varric, furious at the delay, ordered a full planetary invasion. Silari troops landed in cities, expecting terrified civilians to surrender. Instead, they faced something no other species had done before: organized resistance from civilians, armed with whatever they could find. In one battle, a group of human engineers took control of a fallen Silari walker and turned its weapons against its own army. In another, human snipers picked off officers, throwing the invaders into chaos. The Silari began to realize something terrifying. Fear did not work on humans. They had faced monsters before. They had fought wars among themselves for centuries. The Silari were not their first nightmare. A war begins. Varric realized that this was no longer a simple extermination mission. Humanity would not die easily. His fleet was taking unexpected damage. His ground forces were struggling. The invasion was not going as planned. For the first time in Silari history, an invasion was stopped. Varric sent an urgent message back to the High Council. Humanity is not weak. They are not afraid. They are dangerous. The Council, arrogant as ever, dismissed his concerns. If they resist, burn them harder. Varric clenched his jaw. He knew. This was no longer a battle. This was war. And for the first time in the Silari Dominion's long reign, they had made a mistake. They had made humanity their enemy. The Silari had never lost before. They had crushed empires, destroyed worlds, and ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. But now, over a small, insignificant planet called Earth, they were experiencing something new: resistance. Fleet Commander Varric Tetos paced aboard his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching the battle unfold on the massive holographic display before him. The invasion should have been over in hours, but humanity refused to die. Instead of submission, they responded with relentless defiance. Reports poured in from the front lines. Entire divisions of Silari ground forces had been wiped out. Human snipers were taking down officers with disturbing precision. Civilian resistance fighters were using guerrilla tactics the Silari had never encountered before. Worst of all, the humans were learning. They adapted too fast. Their soldiers fought as if they had nothing to lose. Their commanders changed strategies within minutes, reacting to Silari movements with a speed and creativity that defied logic. "This is not possible," one of Varric's officers whispered, his mandibles clicking nervously. "They should be broken by now." Varric remained silent, but deep inside, he felt something he hadn't felt in centuries. Fear. The turning point. The war over Earth was dragging on. The Silari fleet had superior firepower, but every battle took longer than expected. Their supply lines stretched thin. Their soldiers, trained to dominate through fear, were realizing something terrifying. Fear did not work on humans. Captured Silari soldiers reported that even when they tried to terrorize civilians, it only made them fight harder. When they destroyed human cities, survivors swore revenge and launched brutal counterattacks. Humanity did not surrender. It only became more dangerous. On the ground, the Silari's first major defeat came in New Moscow. A key invasion force had been sent to secure the city, expecting little resistance. Instead, they were ambushed. Human engineers hacked into fallen Silari war machines and turned their weapons against their former owners. Snipers and drone strikes took down commanding officers. Within 48 hours, the entire Silari force in the city was wiped out. Varric ordered reinforcements, but it was too late. The humans had captured Silari weapons and were now using them against the invaders. It was unthinkable. The human counterattack. Varric had underestimated his enemy. The humans were not just surviving. They were learning how to win. A few days after the New Moscow disaster, humanity launched its first major counterattack. A coalition of surviving military forces and civilian fighters attacked the Xilari forward bases. Using scavenged alien technology, they overpowered the occupiers. Xilari command posts fell one by one. Warships in orbit struggled to regain control, but the humans had found a way to jam their communications. Without orders, Xilari ground troops became disorganized and weak. For the first time in history, a Xilari invasion was pushed back. Desperation in the Xilari ranks. Varek's officers were in panic. "We must glass the planet," one of them shouted. "If we do not destroy them now, they will become a greater threat." Another officer, more cautious, shook his head. "If we burn Earth, the other species may rise against us. They are already afraid of humanity's defiance. If they see us struggling, they may start to believe the Xilari are not invincible." Varek listened to the arguments in silence. He understood the true danger. This war was already lost. It was no longer about conquering Earth. Humanity had proven something far worse. They could fight the Xilari and win. If a primitive species could push them back, what would happen if they were given time to grow? Varek clenched his fists. This could not be allowed. The order to retreat. For the first time in Xilari history, a full retreat was ordered. Varek had no choice. His fleet had lost too many ships, and his ground forces were in disarray. If he stayed any longer, there was a real possibility the humans would find a way to turn the tide completely. As the Xilari ships withdrew, Earth's defenders watched in stunned silence. They had won. The aftermath. The war had changed everything. Humanity was no longer just another species in the galaxy. They were now a legend. The species that had survived the Xilari Dominion's wrath. The warriors who had forced the greatest empire in history to retreat. But they knew this was not the end. Varek Tethos would return. The Xilari would not accept this humiliation. And next time, they wouldn't just come for Earth. They would come for all of humanity. The Xilari had never forgotten their humiliation. Their empire had conquered thousands of worlds, reduced civilizations to dust, and ruled through absolute fear. But humanity had defied them. And worse, humanity had won. Fleet Commander Varek Tethos had spent the last decade preparing for revenge. The retreat from Earth had been a disgrace, unlike any in Xilari history. Billions of Xilari had demanded punishment. The High Council had debated extermination. But Varek knew that Earth was not the real problem. The problem was humanity itself. It wasn't just one planet. It wasn't just one war. If left unchecked, humans would become the greatest threat the Xilari had ever faced. Now, the time for waiting was over. They would strike before it was too late. The invasion begins. Above the planet Cygnus 7, alarms blared across the human colony. The Xilari had returned, not just with a fleet, but with an armada. Hundreds of warships emerged from hyperspace, forming a blockade around the planet. The skies turned dark with Xilari vessels, their massive battlecruisers eclipsing the sun. Admiral Eric Voss, leader of the United Human Defense Fleet, stood in his command center, watching the incoming threat. His face remained calm, but inside, he knew the truth. They were outnumbered. The colony's defenses were strong, but nothing could withstand an attack of this scale. The Xilari had come with everything. But humanity had learned one lesson from the last war. They would never fight fair. The trap is set. As the Xilari fleet prepared to bombard Cygnus 7, something strange happened. Their scanners picked up no resistance. The colony's anti-air defenses were offline. The human fleet was silent. It was as if humanity had simply given up. Varek Tethos narrowed his eyes. "This is wrong," he muttered. "Humans didn't surrender." He turned to his sensors officer. "Find out what they're hiding." But before the officer could answer, the trap was sprung. From behind Cygnus's moon, dozens of stealth human warships decloaked, unleashing a devastating ambush. Massive railguns fired at point-blank range. EMP missiles disabled Xilari shields. Human strike teams boarded enemy ships, turning their own weapons against them. It was chaos. Scyllari ships exploded in rapid succession, caught completely off guard. Varric watched in horror as his fleet, his unstoppable armada, was suddenly on the defensive. They had fallen into a human trap. The human offensive. For years, humanity had been preparing for this moment. They had built new warships, developed new weapons, and most importantly, they had studied Scyllari tactics. The moment the invasion began, Admiral Voss had already launched a counterstrike. Human Marines stormed Scyllari vessels, using their brutal close combat skills to eliminate enemy commanders. Every Scyllari ship that was boarded became a human ship. The war that was meant to exterminate humanity had turned into a battle for Scyllari survival. Within 3 hours, the Scyllari armada was in retreat. The nightmare of the Scyllari. As Varric's flagship limped away from the battlefield, he realized something far worse than just a lost battle. This wasn't just another war. This was the beginning of the end for the Scyllari. Because now, for the first time, humanity was no longer just fighting for survival. Now, they were hunting. And they would not stop until the Scyllari were no more. The Scyllari had come to wipe humanity from existence. Instead, they had been the ones fleeing the battlefield. Their once mighty armada, built to conquer and destroy, had been shattered by an enemy they once considered inferior. But humanity wasn't done. For centuries, the Scyllari had ruled the galaxy through fear. They crushed worlds that disobeyed them. They turned thriving civilizations into ruins. No one had ever dared to challenge them, until now. For the first time in history, the hunted had become the hunters. No more running. Admiral Eric Voss stood on the bridge of the HSS Retribution, staring at the tactical map. The Scyllari fleet was in full retreat, their forces scrambling to regroup. They were heading back to their core systems, hoping to recover, hoping to rebuild. Voss wasn't going to let them. "Set course for the Traxxas system," he ordered. The officers around him hesitated. The Traxxas system was deep in Scyllari space. Attacking it would be an act of war on a level the galaxy had never seen. Voss's voice was cold. "We're not running anymore. They wanted war. We give them war." The humans in the room nodded. They understood. The time for defense was over. Now, humanity was taking the fight to them. A lesson in terror. 3 days later, the Scyllari colony on Traxxas 4 woke to the sound of sirens. No one had ever attacked a Scyllari core world before. The very idea was unthinkable. And yet, as the morning sky darkened, thousands of human warships entered the system. The Scyllari planetary governor, Shalvek, stood frozen in his command center, watching in horror as human drop pods rained down from orbit like falling stars. Gunships, mechs, and infantry poured into the streets. The Scyllari had always assumed humans would never dare strike their homeworlds. They were wrong. Shalvek tried to contact the Scyllari High Command. No response. The humans had jammed all communications. Then came the final shock, a broadcast sent across the entire planet. The image of Admiral Voss appeared, his eyes cold and merciless. "This is not an invasion," he said. "This is justice. You slaughtered our people. You burned our colonies. You thought we would kneel." He leaned forward. "You were wrong." Then the signal cut. Moments later, the first human railgun batteries opened fire. The fall of a Scyllari world. The battle for Traxxas 4 was not a battle at all. It was a slaughter. Human troops moved through the cities with precision, eliminating resistance with ruthless efficiency. Scyllari forces, once feared across the galaxy, fell in hours. It wasn't just their weapons, it was their tactics. The Scyllari had always ruled through fear, breaking the will of their enemies before they even fought. But now, they were the ones who were afraid. Every Scyllari soldier that fell, every stronghold that crumbled, sent a message to the rest of the Empire. The humans are here, and they are not leaving. No surrender. By nightfall, The Xilari government on Traxxas 4 collapsed. Governor Shelvek, once proud and untouchable, now sat in chains before Admiral Voss. "You don't have to do this," Shelvek whispered. Voss looked at him, eyes empty. "You didn't give us a choice." Then he turned to his officers. "Broadcast a message to the entire Xilari Empire," he ordered. His words were simple. "We are coming." And for the first time in history, the Xilari knew what it was like to feel true fear. The Xilari Empire had always believed itself unbreakable. For centuries, they ruled the galaxy through fear, wiping out civilizations that refused to bow. No species had ever dared to challenge them. No enemy had ever marched upon their worlds. Until now, humanity had changed everything. The fall of Traxxas 4 had sent shockwaves across the Xilari Dominion. Billions watched in horror as their once invincible warriors were hunted like prey. The humans had not just won a battle. They had shattered an illusion. The illusion that the Xilari were invincible. The hunt begins. On board the HSS Retribution, Admiral Eric Voss stood before a war map. The Xilari were panicking. Entire fleets were retreating. Colonies were being abandoned. The empire that had once crushed entire species was now running. Voss turned to his officers. "We don't give them time to recover. We strike now." His words carried iron. There would be no peace, no truce, no negotiations. Humanity had learned long ago that mercy was a weakness that Xilari would exploit. They had burned human colonies, slaughtered millions, and laughed while doing it. Now, humanity would show them what it meant to be hunted. The death of a fleet. Near the Tarnis Nebula, a Xilari fleet was attempting to regroup. It was once a mighty armada, but now it was fractured, broken by the sudden collapse of their empire's confidence. Admiral Shavlik, a veteran commander, paced on the bridge of his battleship. "They're just humans," he growled. "They shouldn't be able to." The alarms blared. A Xilari officer turned, eyes wide in terror. "Sir, human ships inbound. Hundreds of them." Shavlik's stomach turned to ice. The humans weren't defending anymore. They were hunting. Then, out of the darkness, the first human warships emerged. Fast, silent, deadly. Before the Xilari could react, the first railgun barrage tore through their front line. Ships detonated instantly, fireballs blooming in space. Shavlik barely had time to scream orders before the second wave hit. The humans were fighting like nothing that Xilari had ever seen. They didn't hesitate. They didn't negotiate. They slaughtered. One by one, Xilari ships were erased, turned into floating wreckage. Escape pods were left untouched, not because the humans were merciful, but because they wanted survivors to spread the message. The Xilari Empire was dying, and humanity was the executioner. The message of fear. On the Xilari homeworld, High Lord Verthak sat in his throne room, watching in horror as new battle reports came in. Traxxas 4, lost. The Tarnis fleet, destroyed. The eastern colonies, abandoned. His claws dug into the armrest. This wasn't possible. The Xilari had ruled for centuries, their might unquestioned. How could humans be doing this? Then, the palace lights flickered. A transmission forced itself onto every screen in the chamber. The image of Admiral Eric Voss appeared, his expression cold as steel. "This is not a war," Voss said. "This is justice." Verthak felt a shiver crawl down his spine. For the first time in his life, he felt fear. The humans had once been victims. Now, they were the monsters in the dark. And they were coming for him next. The Xilari homeworld, Vortalis Prime, had never known fear. For centuries, it stood as the heart of a mighty empire, a planet of towering spires, unbreakable fortresses, and endless fleets. From here, the Xilari had commanded the galaxy, crushing worlds beneath their rule, erasing civilizations that refused to submit. But now, everything was different. The war reports spoke of massacres, but not by the Xilari, by the humans. Their fleets, once thought primitive, had butchered the Xilari Armada. Their armies, once dismissed as weak, had wiped out entire legions. Their vengeance had turned an empire of conquerors into prey. Now, the final reckoning had arrived. The storm approaches. High Lord Verithak stood in the imperial war chamber, surrounded by his highest generals. Their eyes flickered with fear, their claws twitching nervously. These were the most ruthless minds in the galaxy, leaders who had once ordered the genocide of entire species without hesitation. But now, they were desperate. The chamber's holographic display showed the impossible. Human fleets, thousands of ships, surrounding Vortalis Prime. There was no escape. A trembling officer stepped forward. "High Lord, the humans have sent a message." Verithak turned sharply. "What does it say?" The officer swallowed. His voice shook as he read the words. "Your empire ends today. Surrender or be erased." Silence filled the chamber. For the first time in history, the rulers of the Xilari Empire faced a war they could not win. The human reckoning. Above the planet, the sky burned. The human fleet descended like a force of nature, raining fire upon the once invincible empire. Orbital defenses crumbled in minutes. Xilari warships, once the terror of the galaxy, were torn apart like paper. On the ground, panic spread like wildfire. Cities that had stood for 1,000 years were reduced to ashes in mere hours. Xilari soldiers, once feared across the stars, threw down their weapons in surrender. Human dropships landed in the capital, their boots thundering onto Xilari soil for the first time in history. And at the front of the invasion, Admiral Eric Voss led the charge. The Xilari had started this war. Now, humanity would finish it. No mercy, no escape. Deep within the Imperial Palace, Verithak watched as his world collapsed around him. His greatest fortresses were burning. His armies were gone. A low beeping echoed through the chamber, an urgent call from his last remaining fleet. He answered, and the face of Admiral Shavlek appeared. "High Lord, it's over," the Xilari Admiral whispered. Terror filled his eyes. "Our ships. There's nothing left." The transmission cut out. Verithak realized what had happened. The last of his navy had been wiped from existence. He stumbled back, claws shaking. This couldn't be real. The Xilari had ruled for so long. They were the dominant force of the galaxy. How had it come to this? Then, the doors burst open. A squad of human soldiers stormed inside, their weapons raised, their eyes filled with cold fury. And behind them, Admiral Voss stepped forward. His expression was unreadable, unforgiving. Verithak, the most powerful ruler in the galaxy, fell to his knees. "Mercy," he whispered. Voss's gaze hardened. "Did you show any mercy to our people?" Silence. The High Lord knew the answer. There would be no mercy today. Voss raised his weapon, and with a single shot, the Xilari Empire died. The galaxy after the fall. The war was over. Humanity had won. The Xilari homeworld was now under human control. Their empire, once spanning thousands of worlds, had been reduced to dust. Across the galaxy, former slaves and victims of the Xilari cheered as news of the empire's fall spread. The tyrants who had ruled with fear were no more. And humanity, the species they had underestimated, now stood as the most powerful force in the galaxy. They had not just survived the war. They had changed the future forever. The galaxy had changed. The fall of the Xilari Empire had sent shockwaves across the stars. For centuries, they had ruled with an iron grip, their fleets unchallenged, their word absolute. But now, the unthinkable had happened. Humanity had destroyed them. Their homeworld lay in ruins, their leaders were dead, and their vast armies had been wiped out. The galaxy, once gripped by fear, now held its breath. What would humanity do next? Would they become the new overlords, just as ruthless as the Xilari? Or would they forge a different path? Many species had once feared the humans, but now they looked to them for leadership. Some welcomed them as liberators, while others watched with cautious eyes, unsure if the destruction of one empire would simply give rise to another. On Earth, the victory was celebrated, but it was not without cost. Millions of human soldiers had died in the war. Entire colonies had been lost, wiped out by the Exilari before humanity could fight back. The war had taken everything from some: families shattered, cities reduced to rubble, and an entire generation forever changed. The scars of war ran deep, and while the Exilari were gone, their actions had left wounds that would take years to heal. Yet despite everything, there was one undeniable truth: humanity had proven itself. No longer were they the newcomers to the galactic stage. They had fought, they had suffered, and in the end, they had won. No species would ever underestimate them again. Admiral Eric Voss stood on the bridge of the UNS Retribution, staring at the wreckage of what had once been the Exilari's most powerful fleet. The battle was over, but the silence that followed felt heavier than the war itself. Reports came in from across the galaxy. Exilari warlords who had escaped the initial attacks were now being hunted down, remnants of their once great empire crumbling into lawless chaos. The Exilari who remained had two choices: surrender and accept the rule of their former prey, or flee and live as exiles in the dark corners of space. Many refused to surrender, choosing instead to fight to the bitter end. Voss had no sympathy for them. They had enslaved and slaughtered countless species. Now they faced the consequences. But there was another problem, one that worried Voss more than the remnants of the Exilari. Power vacuums always created opportunities, and already he was hearing rumors. Other empires, once held in check by the Exilari's dominance, now saw a chance to expand. The Telnar Confederacy, the Gore Dominion, and the Vateri Alliance. Each of them had remained neutral in the war, unwilling to challenge the Exilari while humanity fought. Now, with the Exilari gone, they saw a galaxy ripe for the taking. The war was over, but conflict was far from finished. Voss knew that humanity had no intention of ruling the galaxy as conquerors. They had fought to survive, not to dominate. But would the other species understand that? Or would they see humanity's rise as a threat to their own ambitions? The peace they had won could be short-lived. As Voss reviewed intelligence reports, a message came through. A distress signal from a remote system on the edge of what had once been Exilari space. It wasn't from humans. It wasn't from Exilari survivors either. It was from a species the Exilari had once enslaved, begging for help. Without the Exilari to hold control, old enemies had come to take their place. The weak were being preyed upon once more. And so, humanity faced a choice. They could retreat, focus on rebuilding their own worlds, and let the galaxy descend into chaos. Or they could step forward, take responsibility for the power they now held, and ensure that no new tyrants rose to take the place of the Exilari. Voss already knew the answer. Humanity had fought too hard to let the galaxy fall back into darkness. They had seen what unchecked power could do, and they refused to let it happen again. The war had ended, but their fight for a better future had just begun. The fleet prepared to move once more, not as conquerors, but as protectors. The galaxy had seen what humanity was capable of. Now it was time to show them what kind of future they intended to build. The galaxy had changed, but peace was still a distant dream. Humanity had shattered the Exilari Empire, proving that even the most feared overlords could fall. Their war fleets lay in ruins, their homeworlds reduced to ashes, and their once mighty warriors scattered across the void. The species they had ruled with terror now stood on the edge of a new era, one where fear no longer dictated their fate. Yet even as humanity stood victorious, the question remained: what came next? Admiral Eric Voss stood on the command deck of the UNS Retribution, watching the holographic projections of the galaxy before him. The Exilari were finished, but their destruction had left a power vacuum. Already, whispers of new conflicts were spreading. Old rivalries between the surviving alien empires had reignited. Some species, once too afraid to resist the Exilari, now turned their weapons against each other. Others feared humanity's rise, wondering if the destroyers of the Xilari would become the next great rulers of the stars. And then there were those who had suffered under the Xilari's rule, species who now called out for help, desperate to rebuild, to defend themselves, to ensure they would never be enslaved again. Humanity had a choice. They could retreat, return to their own worlds, and leave the galaxy to sort itself out. After all, they had fought for survival, not conquest. Their fleets were bloodied, their people weary, and their colonies still recovering from the devastation of war. No one could blame them if they turned inward, choosing to rebuild their strength instead of getting involved in the struggles of other species. But that was not who they were. They had seen what happened when tyrants ruled unchecked. They had felt the cost of war, the weight of oppression, the horror of extermination. They could not simply turn their backs on those who now looked to them for hope. Reports flooded in from every sector. The Telnar Confederacy had launched a campaign of conquest, seizing former Xilari territories and enslaving their populations. The Gore Dominion, a warlike species that had once been kept in check by the Xilari's power, was now mobilizing its fleets, eager to carve out its own empire. And in the far reaches of space, a desperate message had been received. An outpost of former Xilari slaves, now free, was under attack by unknown forces. Voss clenched his jaw as he processed the data. He had fought too long, lost too many, to let the galaxy fall into another cycle of war and oppression. Humanity had not fought just to replace one tyrant with another. If they turned away now, they would be no better than the Xilari themselves. No, they would not retreat. They would stand, not as conquerors, but as defenders of those who could not defend themselves. The decision was made. Humanity's fleets would not withdraw. They would move forward, not to claim power, but to ensure that no new empire of fear would rise again. They would answer the distress calls, they would protect the weak, and they would remind the galaxy of one undeniable truth. Humanity was not to be feared because of its strength. It was to be feared because it refused to stand by while others suffered. As the ships powered up, engines burning bright against the darkness of space, a message was sent out across the galaxy. To those who sought to rule with fear, a warning. Humanity would not allow it. To those who sought protection, a promise. They would not be abandoned. And to the galaxy itself, a declaration. Humanity had arrived, and it would not turn away from the fight. The war was over, but humanity's mission had just begun.